Everyone had warned him, "Don't go into the forest after midnight. There's something waiting in the dark." These words had echoed in Samer's ears ever since he was a child. Everyone in the village knew that the dark forest was home to ancient, terrifying secrets. But over time, Samar began to lose interest in those warnings. Curiosity was stronger than fear. And when he heard about the ancient legends surrounding that abandoned forest, he couldn't resist the temptation. The story intrigued him. Anyone who enters that forest will never leave, unless their fate is to be the next one. Samar had always been a rebel against conventions, a person who craved adventure and excitement. He grew up in a small village surrounded by dense forests, where nothing unusual ever happened except at specific times. The villagers spoke of the cursed forest in hushed tones, filled with fear. But for Samar, it was all just old myths. The stories told by the elders about people disappearing in that forest. Their bodies reappearing after weeks, but not looking human. Anymore, they looked like something else made his heart race with curiosity. For him, these were just tales made up by the elderly. That dark night, when the moon was hidden behind thick clouds and the wind howled through the trees, Samar decided to test the legend himself. He carried a small lantern in his hand, its light flickering as it danced with the long shadows of the surrounding trees. Despite the growing fear in his chest with every step, curiosity pushed him forward. He could feel something strange creeping up on him as he approached the forest, as if the air was thickening, and everything around him darkened. He felt as though the forest was closing in from every side, as if it were alive, breathing, and watching him. The forest was unusually dark, and the place felt unfamiliar to him, as if it were punishing anyone daring enough to enter. The trees were old and decaying, their branches bent as if on the verge of collapse, and the air was thick with dampness. But Samar pressed on, knowing that no adventure was complete without confronting fear. As time passed, the darkness became even more intense, and Samar felt as though something was watching him. The ground beneath his feet was thick with mud and moisture, and the only sound was the rustling of the leaves and the creaking of dry branches underfoot. But at a certain moment, he began to sense something strange building around him. There was a feeling of anticipation, as if unseen eyes were following his every move. He kept glancing around, but saw nothing. Then, as he ventured deeper into the forest, he heard faint, unclear sounds. At first, he thought it was the wind, but the sounds began to intertwine with whispers, as if someone was speaking to him. He focused more intently and realized the whispers were calling his name, Samar, Samar. Each time, the voice grew closer. He stopped dead in his tracks, took a deep breath, but still saw no one around him. The wind's whispers seemed to become clearer with each passing second. He continued walking, and the further he ventured into the heart of the forest, the louder the voices became. Strangely, he could hear his own name being called, as if something invisible was following his every move. The ground began to tremble beneath him, as if it were about to split open. Suddenly, in a dark corner between the trees, he discovered an abandoned hut. It appeared as if no one had opened it for years. The wooden door was half off its hinges, and the windows were cracked. Despite the village's warnings, Samar decided to go inside. He knew he might be digging his own grave, but he was determined to uncover the truth. He cautiously entered the hut, stepping over broken furniture and creaking floorboards. The place was eerie, dust filling the air, and the furniture was ruined and covered with old sheets. What caught his attention, however, was the large mirror in the middle of the room. The mirror was ancient, with a cracked wooden frame, chipped and weathered by time. It was clear that the hut hadn't seen visitors in many years. Yet the mirror was still standing there in the center of the room, as though it had been waiting for him. What struck him as strange was that this mirror was different from any he had seen before. As he stood before it, he noticed that the mirror didn't reflect his face in a normal way. Instead, it reflected only his back, as if there was something he couldn't see from the front. The mirror was unnervingly dark, almost as if it was silently calling to him. Samar froze in place, and as he stepped closer, he realized the reflection was not showing only his features. Behind him, the reflection was distorted. His heart began to race, and he could feel a weight pressing on his chest. The reflection didn't appear normal, it was moving unnaturally. In a moment, his reflection smiled, but it wasn't a normal smile. It was twisted, unnatural, and monstrous. The smile began to widen, and the reflection started pulling away, leaving behind pure darkness. From that darkness, a hand emerged. Before Samar could understand what was happening, the hand shot out from the mirror, grabbing him tightly and pulling him in. He struggled, but the hand was stronger than him. Coldness began to seep into his veins. His vision blurred, and everything around him went black. Sama suddenly awoke to find himself sitting in the forest again. But everything was different. The trees moved slowly, as if they were breathing. The sky was entirely dark, with no moon or stars, as if time had stopped. He began to walk, but there was no sound under his feet, as if the earth had swallowed up all the noise. The forest was eerily silent, as though no living creature existed within it. Yet strange noises echoed in the distance, as if something was coming from the dark. Everything seemed upside down. He saw the hut again, but this time it was no longer abandoned. There was light spilling from the windows, and the door was wide open. He entered cautiously and went straight to the same room where he had seen the mirror earlier. But now, he didn't find himself there. The mirror was still there, but it didn't reflect his image. Instead, it reflected a distorted figure, perhaps a ghost or a creature from another world. He began to hear the voice again, this time from inside the mirror. "Didn't I tell you that you would stay here forever?" His reflection in the mirror moved freely, while he remained motionless. His eyes seemed empty, dark, and his smile was twisted beyond recognition. Laughter began to echo throughout the room, the sound growing louder until it felt like his mind might explode. The laughter bounced off the walls, as if it were feeding off his fear. He tried to escape, but no matter how close he got to the door, he always found himself back in the same room. The forest had swallowed him whole. The place grew darker and darker, his voice fading into the echoes of the laughter. Every time he tried to escape, the walls seemed to close in on him, as if the entire place was against him. He no longer knew where reality ended and the nightmare began. Every time he drew closer to the mirror, the creature inside smiled even wider, its eyes never leaving his. The next morning Samar returned to his home, but he wasn't the same. He moved oddly, spoke in a different voice, and never blinked. His family noticed the change, but they couldn't understand what had happened. The real Samar, however, remained trapped behind the mirror. He became nothing more than a reflection in that ancient glass, forever watching as others passed by. Since that day, stories spread about people who had stared at their mirrors for too long. They felt something strange, something moving behind them, something not themselves. And they returned, but they weren't the same. No one could explain what had happened, but in every home, there was a mirror, and in every mirror, there was a legend. And every night, when the house grew still, strange sounds began to echo. Whispers from within the glass, as if someone or something was watching them from the other side. Do you have a mirror in your room? Don't stare into it for too long. You might be watched already. And when you turn around, you may not be alone anymore. Sometimes, curiosity can be deadly. You might think you have control over things, but there is always something stronger than you, something that watches you from the shadows. When you turn around, you may find that you've lost more than just time. You might have lost yourself.